Okay, so with the course overview, I wanted to provide a bit more context about what we're going to be covering in the class before our last section, in which we talk a little bit about the types of conflict we're going to be focusing on in the class. So a little bit of logistics and then ending with the fun actual substance. So in the course, I've broken up into three sections. The first kind of defining our terms, our actors, and the interests that they have related to these three areas of environment, human security, and conflict. The next section is focusing on the causes, right? The focus is on explanation in this class, so trying to understand the types of things we talk about in the first part of the class. And then in the last section, the last 2 weeks, we're focusing on domestic and international responses to either mitigate or adapt to climate change or to be able to prevent the types of conflicts and human security failures that we're going to be talking about in the class. I have, of course, 4 different options for the assessment in the class. First time, I've broken it out and given people a choice, but I do think for a couple of different reasons that this is an experiment that I'm trying to make, because I think my goal in this class is to get you to theoretically and empirically grapple with the large questions that this class deals with, right? How do we understand the world as it is today? What are the drivers for these kind of outcomes? How can we understand the world that is defined by atypical world-changing events that we've seen over the last couple of decades, and to be able to tie those large themes that we covered in the class to your own particular research. So across all options, I have participation, right, which is going to come from evidence of actually watching the lectures, doing the readings, and discussing the issues, being engaged in the class, participating, being an active participant in the class. That is often driven by the workshops that we have, the different options for doing the workshops this term, but then also, just as an FYI, people talk about the ability and transparency of information in the world today. That is something that also carries on to higher education. Everything that you do on Waddle or on YouTube can be tracked and seen, and so I try to focus on an evidence-based idea of participation, and I'll post basic measures of whether you actually completed the workshops, shown up, and did your work on a week-to-week basis, and then the overall participation mark is given at the end of the term with more qualitative assessments of the larger contribution that you've made in the class. And hopefully by the breaking up the workshop into different segments, I will be able to have that individual level knowledge that the students in the class are not just numbers, even with 160 students, that I can try to get to know you at a deeper level in your contribution on an ongoing basis in the workshops as well as in the lectures. At the bottom, of course, I gave the option for getting credit for the lecture questions. We've had 3 of them so far today, and I'll do 3 of them scattered through the lectures over the course of each week, that if you want to get credit for actually giving that feedback. I really enjoyed the last time I had these lecture questions, reading them on Waddle, to be able to get that kind of feedback. I can sit here and talk to my computer for 12 weeks and never really get a sense of that kind of interaction that I thrived on for all those years that I've been teaching so far. And so I want to try to make this as interactive as possible. And so by giving an incentive for the grade to be able to do that, that provides you an excuse to be disciplined in actually watching the lectures and thinking about the issues, as well as giving me an opportunity to get a sense of what you take away from the material and what your interests are in the class material as well. The literature review, proposal, and the final essay, those are the written assessments. I have writing guides posted already from the last time I taught the course in 2020 at the top of Waddle. This is going to be an ongoing process. I'm happy to discuss any questions that you have about it in workshop or with one-on-one Zooms or emails. But I designed the assessment to try to, as a third-year class, make it research intensive, actually producing what you shouldn't feel pressure to make sure your paper is completely unique, but it's unique because no one, you as you, have never written an essay for this class before, right? And you haven't been introduced to the material in this way with this focus in this class. And so as a research process, you're going to link the literature and the readings and the topics that we cover in the class to your own specific topics that you have your research interests in your literature review, which should give you a good idea of what work has been done in the area, come up with questions, puzzles that you find unanswered in the literature so far that you might address in your own manageable sized undergraduate research essay. And I have had students that have written research essays in their undergraduate classes like mine that they end up turning into something larger in an honors thesis or a PhD thesis. And so this is my way of trying to teach the skills of critical thinking, systematic writing, and analysis of the types that people that we have to read in the class have developed in their own time. We're not born with these refined research skills, but we are born with innate curiosity, the understanding of experimentation and trying new things in order to try to figure out cause and effect. And I wanted to try to carry that into the written assessment as well. We are going to be faced with a lot of quantitative articles in this class. This week was 2 literature reviews. We're going to be talking about them in the workshop, but a lot of the evidence and a lot of the research being done on the topics we covered in this class are using quantitative techniques. And this can be difficult for people coming from backgrounds or majors in which those reading skills aren't necessarily relevant to their classes or their research assessments. And so I want to try to make my mental map and my water for the expectations of the class as transparent as possible. And when you're reading, you want to be reading strategically and selectively, right? Kind of like how you approach the larger decisions that you're faced with, the multitude of different pressures you face in your day-to-day life. You want to look at the general theory, the theoretical contribution that the authors are really trying to make. What are they trying to tell us about the world that we didn't already know before, right? That natural disasters can actually lead to peace instead of just a war. That could be the theoretical contribution. The empirical effects might be how large of the effect different types of disasters have on conflict, or different, as temperature or oceans rise a certain percentage, how much stress that puts on human security. So what's the theoretical contribution, the why that the authors are focusing on, and the how much is what that substantive effect is actually having. And what we'll see hopefully over the course of the term, and I'm happy to discuss this in workshop, is how there's largely a similar structure to modern social science research as well as research in a bunch of different fields. We're going to read people who don't do political science and then do other topics as well. But there's a lot of similarity and expectations in how we approach writing articles. And I'm a journal editor now, and I see this. There is some derivations, but by and large, this is the way that science has evolved to be able to bring across information in an understandable and concise manner. Start with an introduction. You tell people what you're going to include in your essay. You briefly summarize the previous research that's gone before, right? Drawing that theoretical map. Then make your own argument. You make your own addition to that map with a clear theoretical argument. And then observable implications of that argument, right? If I put my hand on a hot stove, I'm going to get burned, right? And the theory is heat transfer damages human tissue, right? The observable hypothesis is if I do something, something else is likely to happen. Research design, discussion results, robustness checks, conclusions, policy implications, and areas for future research. It is less important that you try to get into the nitty-gritty of how people operationalize their empirical models, but just in the sense of how people come up with proxies for their theories, right? If we're focusing on human development and what leads to human development, or what human development's effects on conflict are, how you measure human development is not necessarily universally agreed on standard. Some people might focus on gender inequality or life expectancy or education. There's a bunch of different measures, a bunch of different theoretical topics that all lead into these general topics that we cover in the class. And so you can really grapple with people's theories and how they prioritize some aspects of an outcome they're looking at or another by what kind of proxies they use in economic, political, social, or otherwise. And then you can kind of skip through all the math and the tables. We are going to be grappling with some of the tables in the class because I want students in this class to be able to leave it with the ability to read the research for themselves. In an era of fake news and skepticism about the usefulness of basic research or abstract research, it's become even more crucial for people to be able to go to the original source and to be able to be consumers of it and to be able to make evaluations about how convincing the theory or the evidence is. So you don't have to rely on other people's interpretations of the reality. You can go there and be able to read it for yourself. So yeah, I have gone through that process as well. And so this is my one interpretation of the theories and evidence related to the topics. Lots of people would have their own background and come to their own way of trying to design the class. I had to read a lot of syllabi of other people. So I think I've taken on board a lot of the best practices in this topic, but I do have my own research interests and implicit or explicit biases about topics and areas of focus that I find the most interesting. I have my own researcher page. I have my own private website. If you're curious about my own research, I thought it would take 2 seconds to kind of provide a brief overview of some of the research that I do that relate to this topic. One project that that I've been working on and struggling with geographic data is the effect on climate on political instability, kind of related to this class, related to precipitation and foreign direct investment, how corporations can come into countries and make things better or worse. I'm an international relations scholar, and my main focus is on how international relations, international actors can make things better or worse in countries, often developing countries. So I use precipitation data here limited to the continent of Africa and connected it with foreign direct investment projects and instability measures to try to make an argument about why corporations get involved in areas that are either environmentally unstable or politically unstable. And one of the main opening cases that I talk about in one of the articles that I'm researching is connected to Australian politics in a Four Corners episode in which I can go into more detail in the workshop if we're interested. An international Australian mining company had trucks and resources in a remote part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, in a similar area to that open pit gold mining picture that I showed earlier. And the resources were used by government actors to be able to allegedly commit war crimes and to be able to crack down on a small rebel group in the area. They were eventually cleared. A couple of the people were I think, guilty of civil charges, and the company was quietly sold to a Chinese mining conglomerate later on. But I think my research and my interest is looking at how these international actors have effects on the dynamics of conflict that we're going to look at in the next few weeks. Speaking of conflict, let's take a break and come back and talk about a couple of the basic drivers, trends, and theoretical and empirical decisions we make when we talk about conflict.